Hey, Zach.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, you got some questions for me?
I do. So what exactly is a Chapter 7 bankruptcy?
Well, most people ask that question in the context of, I heard of Chapter 7, I've heard of Chapter 13. Chapter 7 is when you file for the bankruptcy, you're looking to discharge all of your debts and walk away from these debts in a manner where you don't have to make a payment plan. Now, when I say all of your debts, I should be a little more specific. Credit card debts. If you have, say, $100,000 worth of credit card debts, in a Chapter 7, you can actually walk away from all of that credit card debt. Let's say you have a house that has a mortgage for $300,000 on it. You can actually, there are many contexts in which you can actually keep that house and keep that mortgage in place so you don't walk away from that, but you don't walk away from that on purpose because you want to keep the house. So in a 7, you're allowed to, using that credit card $100,000 number that we were talking about before, you can write all that off and walk away from it. If you were to do a Chapter 13, which comes with a payment plan, you would actually be making a series of monthly payments over a term that's typically 60 months long, where you're repaying back some of that. In a 7, you're basically going into the trustee and the bankruptcy court, and you're saying that my income minus my expenses is some negative number. Therefore, I can't afford a payment plan to pay back creditors and go into this Chapter 13 plan. So, in a nutshell, that's what a Chapter 7 is.
All right. Now, what exactly is the process that goes into filing for a Chapter 7?
The first thing that I do with folks on the 7 is I get an idea of what their income and their expenses are to find out if they're negative, to determine if they qualify. And then another thing that I look at too is I want to find out, do they own a house? Do they have equity in the house? If someone has equity in a house, then you can only have so much equity. If you're a single individual, you can only maintain $50,000 equity in a house, and if you're a married couple, you can maintain $100,000 equity. What that means is that, let's suppose that the house is worth $400,000, and you have a mortgage that's outstanding on the thing for $300,000. So the $400 value versus the $300 mortgage, that means you got $100,000 worth of equity. Well, if you're a married couple, that is okay. You have this thing that's called a homestead exemption, where you can keep the house and keep the equity and still write off credit cards. Now, I know that sounds amazingly unfair to the credit card companies. Here you are writing off $100,000 worth of credit cards and you're keeping $100,000 in equity in the house, but bankruptcy law lets you do that. Let's say same house, same scenario, and it's an individual as opposed to a couple. Well, now there's a problem, because as an individual, you can't keep $100,000 equity in the house. You can only keep $50,000. So if you were to file a bankruptcy, and either you or a bankruptcy attorney you're working with didn't know better, that would be a very bad thing to do, because now you put the trustee in an awkward situation where he sees equity in a property, and you put him in a situation where he's got to think about selling this property, getting the equity out of it, and paying back some of that credit card debt. And that's not a situation that you'd want to be in. So, what other questions might you have?
I was just wondering, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of a Chapter 7 bankruptcy?
Well, one advantage, like we talked about before, is the ability to write off debts in a manner that you couldn't do it, say, in a Chapter 13. Avoiding a payment plan with the 13 and just writing off debts could be a really tremendous benefit, because you don't know what's going to happen over the next 5 years. All kinds of things can go wrong and mess up a Chapter 13. So one of the benefits is the walk-away power that you get with a Chapter 7 with regards to your debt. Another thing too, which a lot of people seem to be they have some misunderstandings under, is they assume that because they're filing a Chapter 7 that they can't keep their house, and that's absolutely not true. There are certain rules that you have to file. We talked about one of them with this homestead exemption before. But if depending on how your numbers play themselves out, you can keep a house, you can keep the mortgage on the house, and you can still write off the credit card debts, and you can even keep up to $100,000 worth of equity in the house if it's a couple, or 50 if it's an individual. So that would be a plus.
So what are the disadvantages then?
A negative aspect of a Chapter 7 could include the fact that we talked before about your credit. You know, now that you've filed a Chapter 7, it's going to be on your credit report, and it's going to stay there for the next 10 years, which is probably one of the biggest concerns that people come in. How's this going to affect my credit? Well, you know, a lot of times people don't even have good credit to begin with. You know, their credit's already down to like 520, so filing a bankruptcy doesn't bring it down much further, because the lowest you can have for a credit score is a 450. It goes from 450 to 850. So the impact on the credit. Another negative of a Chapter 7, if you're filing a 7 and you're looking to surrender a home as part of the Chapter 7, that could come with a bit of a stigmatism down the road, because if you're working with if you're getting out of a house that you're upside down on, meaning that you're negative, you owe too much money on, and then you allow that to go into a foreclosure, and you use the Chapter 7 to protect you from the bank coming after you personally for the deficiency, then down the road another lender would say, well, this is a person that historically has surrendered a house. So a negative of a Chapter 7 could be that the lender sees that you had utilized the Chapter 7 to walk away from a home.
Mm-hmm.
And of course a lender might not lend because of that, and that would be a negative aspect.
Now, besides the test that you were talking about before, what other eligibility requirements are there for Chapter 7?
All right. Well, the means test is the test that you're referring to. What that is geographically, depending on where you live, there's a certain set of numbers that the government thinks that you should be spending to earn a living here. This is how much income you should have, this is how much expenses that we think you should be spending, and therefore either you pass the means test or not, meaning that you have enough means. The test is a lot different than if I did a real P&L. If I did your income statement minus your expenses and I came up with a number as your real numbers, that's always different than what the means test numbers are.
Of course.
But the government has to establish some kind of criteria to determine if someone that's truly needy, using the means test as their way of testing that. They use that as a filtering mechanism to make sure that not just anybody's filing for bankruptcy. So that's one of the criteria. Some of the other criteria, we touched on one before, having too much money, too much equity in a property could preclude you from wanting to file a Chapter 7, because you could only shield so much equity, $50,000 per individual and $100,000 per couple. So that might be something that would preclude you from doing a 7 and maybe want to do some other type of bankruptcy like a Chapter 13. You have any other questions?
No, that's about it.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot.